3 weeks. That was all that stood between me and the church aisle. White dress, vows, and the promise of forever. 3 weeks before I would become a wife, surrounded by family and blessings, sealed with a kiss, in a ceremony paid for by his deeply religious grandmother. I used to say, I'm getting married with a smile. Now I say I was supposed to. Because while I was home finalizing seating charts and floral arrangements, my fiancé was at his bachelor party, letting multiple women grind on him, lap dancing over and over as his friends cheered. One even tucked money into her own dress, while he laughed and tipped her more. I didn't confront him, I didn't send a text, I didn't even give him the chance to lie. I forwarded the live stream to the woman who believed in him most, his grandmother, the woman paying $85,000 for the wedding. The woman who saw marriage as sacred, not entertainment. I included just one sentence. You should see this before you finalize the flower payment tomorrow. Then I turned off my phone. By sunrise, everything had collapsed. 43 missed calls, 89 texts, voicemails stacked with anger and excuses. And from him, the first words were, "What did you do?" Not "I'm sorry," not "I made a mistake." Just blame, directed at me for revealing what he willingly broadcast to the world. His grandmother canceled everything before noon. Venue, catering, photography, gone. A 3-week countdown to forever destroyed in hours. And suddenly, the man I thought I knew transformed into someone who cared more about losing money and respectability than losing me. His mother called me vindictive. His friends called me dramatic. He called me heartless. But the truth was bitter and simple. He wasn't sorry for the lap dances. He was sorry the consequences arrived. And in the quiet after the chaos, I realized something I never expected. I wasn't mourning the wedding. I was relieved I hadn't married a man who treated commitment like a joke. 3 weeks from forever became 3 weeks from freedom. I met him 4 years ago, long before wedding spreadsheets and church pews entered the picture. We weren't flashy. We didn't have a dramatic meet-cute. It was quiet, steady. 2 people easing into each other's lives in a way that felt safe. He made me laugh. He listened. He remembered small things. When he proposed 18 months ago, it felt earned, not rushed, not performative. He knelt down with a ring he bought himself, hands shaking just enough that I knew it mattered. I said yes, without hesitation. He was 29, I was 27. He worked in pharmaceutical sales, polished, charming, good at reading people. He came from what I believed was a conservative family. Not loud about it, but structured. Values. Church on holidays. Respectability. His grandmother was the center of that family. She raised him after his parents' divorce. Southern Baptist. Church 3 times a week. Prayer before meals. She believed marriage was sacred, not symbolic. She was also wealthy, old money from her late husband's business. When we got engaged, she offered to pay for the entire wedding as her gift to us. $85,000. Venue, catering, flowers, photography. The kind of wedding you see in magazines and assume only exists for other people. I was grateful, but honestly, I would have been fine with something smaller. I told him that. He said his grandmother wanted this, that it mattered to her. She had one condition. The ceremony had to be in a church, and we had to attend premarital counseling with her pastor. Fine. If sitting through counseling sessions made her happy, it seemed like a small price to pay for her generosity. And truthfully, the sessions didn't raise any alarms. We talked about finances, conflict, expectations, faith. He said all the right things. Looking back, I realized how good he was at sounding sincere. The bachelor party came together the way these things usually do. His best man planned it. A few friends, a short flight, Thursday to Sunday, standard stuff. He texted when they landed, sent photos from dinner, told me he loved me. Saturday afternoon, he sent a picture of his outfit for the night. Same shirt I'd seen in the live stream later. That detail sticks with me. Saturday night, I was home. Quiet, normal. I was folding laundry and watching something mindless when my phone buzzed around 11. Instagram notification. Someone had tagged me in a video. I didn't recognize the account at first. It was a nightclub's promotional page. They post party clips, crowds, dancing, hashtags, marketing. I tapped it without thinking. And there he was, my fiancé, at a VIP table, letting multiple women grind on him. The music was loud, but I could see everything. His smile, his hands resting where they shouldn't have been. Women taking turns giving him lap dances while his friends laughed and filmed. One of them tucked money into her own dress and kept dancing while he tipped her more. I watched it again and again. Different women, same behavior. This wasn't one drunken lapse, it was a pattern playing out in public. I didn't feel hysterical, I felt hollow. I didn't call him, I didn't text him. I took a screenshot, then another, then forwarded the video to the person who had invested the most, financially and emotionally, in this marriage. His grandmother. I added one sentence. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heart pound in the silence. I didn't sleep much, and by morning, the life I thought I was building was already gone. I woke up to chaos. My phone felt heavy in my hand before I even unlocked it, like it already knew what was waiting for me. 43 missed calls, 89 text messages, voicemails stacked so tightly the app lagged when I tried to open it. His name filled the screen first, then his mother, his sister, his best man. Numbers I didn't recognize but could guess belonged to friends and family, suddenly invested in explaining away what I had seen with my own eyes. And in the middle of it all, his first text. What did you do? Not, I'm sorry. Not, I messed up. Not even, can we talk? Just accusation, immediate and unfiltered. That was the moment something inside me went very still, because even before I read another message, I understood exactly how this was going to go. This wasn't going to be about his behavior. It was going to be about my reaction to it. The messages blurred together as I scrolled. You ruined everything. She cut me off completely. Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't have to take it that far. His grandmother, I later learned, had called him in the middle of the night, screaming, praying, crying. Then she'd started making calls of her own. Venue first, then the caterer, the florist, the photographer. One by one, she dismantled the wedding like she was tearing down a house built on rot. By the time I woke up, it was over. The wedding wasn't postponed. It wasn't under discussion. It was canceled. His next wave of messages shifted in tone, anger bleeding into panic. He said I'd embarrassed him. He said I'd destroyed his family. He said his grandmother had completely cut him off financially. Still no apology. His mother left a voicemail that made my hands shake. She called me vindictive, said I was cruel for running to an old woman instead of handling this like an adult. His sister texted that I should have given him a chance to explain. His best man said I'd gone nuclear over harmless bachelor party fun. Harmless. I replayed the video in my head without opening it again. The way he leaned back, the way he smiled, the money, the laughter, the confidence of a man who didn't think there would be consequences. Explain what? That he forgot he was engaged, that he forgot the internet exists, that he forgot his grandmother was paying for everything? What cut the deepest wasn't the insults or the threats. It was the complete absence of remorse. In dozens of messages, not a single I'm sorry, just rage that the truth had reached someone who could do something about it. Late that afternoon, his grandmother called me. Her voice was calm, controlled, tired in a way that told me this wasn't the first disappointment she'd carried. She said she was sorry for what I was going through, said she'd raised him better than this, or at least believed she had. She told me the deposits were mostly non-refundable, but she would rather lose $40,000 than watch me marry a man who didn't respect marriage before it even began. I thanked her, and I meant it. When I hung up, I sat in silence and realized something uncomfortable but undeniable. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had shown the truth. And everything collapsing afterward was built on his choices, not mine. By evening, he was demanding we talk in person. I said no. There wasn't anything left to explain. 2 days later, he showed up at my apartment, unannounced, uninvited, like the last 48 hours hadn't happened. I was working from home when I heard the door unlock. The sound made my stomach drop before my mind caught up. Then he was there, standing in the doorway, backpack on one shoulder, jaw set tight with irritation instead of shame. We need to talk, he said, already stepping inside. No, I replied, standing up. We don't. He ignored that and walked in anyway. He still had a key. I hadn't changed the locks yet, and he knew it. He sat down on the couch like he still belonged there, like this was a disagreement he could outwait. You don't get to blow up my entire life and then disappear, he said. You don't get to humiliate me like that. I didn't humiliate you, I said. You did that yourself. He scoffed. It was my bachelor party. Do you even know what those are for? It's the last night of freedom. Everyone goes a little crazy. Letting multiple women grind on you and give you lap dances isn't a little crazy, I said. It's a choice. He leaned back, arms crossed. It was a joke. They bought champagne. Someone tucked cash into her own dress. What, like $20? You're acting like I slept with someone. You were enjoying it, I said. I watched the video more than once. It's dancing, he snapped. God, you're so uptight. The way he said it, dismissive, irritated, made something settle in my chest. This wasn't a man who misunderstood. This was a man who genuinely didn't think he'd done anything wrong. I want you to leave, I said. No, he shot back immediately. Not until we fix this. Fix this. You embarrassed me in front of my grandmother, he continued. Do you have any idea what she's saying about me? About us? My entire family thinks I'm some kind of disgrace now. 3 weeks before your wedding, I said. That's the part you keep skipping. You could have come to me, he said sharply. We could have handled this privately, but instead you went nuclear. I showed her the truth, I said. That's not nuclear. You cost me everything, he said. She cut me off, completely. You know what that means. There it was.
Not remorse, not regret.
Loss of access. I think you should go, I said again, my voice steady. We're not done talking. Yes, we are. I walked to the door and opened it. He stared at me for a long moment, clearly waiting for me to hesitate. When I didn't, his expression hardened. You're going to regret this, he said. You'll never find anyone like me. That's the hope, I replied. He grabbed his bag and stormed out. 2 days later, his mother called. You need to fix this, she said without greeting. No, I answered. My son is devastated. His wedding is ruined. His relationship with his grandmother is destroyed. And it's because you couldn't handle a little harmless fun. Harmless fun doesn't get live streamed and tagged, I said. And I didn't destroy anything. Your son made choices. I showed someone those choices. She accused me of being bitter, of bruising his ego, of tearing apart a family over nothing. I hung up. The next day, a letter arrived from a lawyer. Not a lawsuit, just a demand. He was claiming he was entitled to reimbursement for various wedding-related expenses he said he had paid or committed to. Alterations, travel costs, deposits for things he now claimed I had promised to cover. A total of $8,400. I called a friend who's a lawyer. He laughed. Told me there was no legal basis. Told me to ignore it. So I did. That evening, while I was at work, he came back to the apartment and took some of his things. And some of mine, including my game console. I sent one text. You have 24 hours to return it or I report it stolen. He dropped it off the next morning without a word. That was when I finally changed the locks. After he left, the apartment felt unfamiliar, too quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, listening to the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected shaking. Tears. Something dramatic. Instead, there was a strange, hollow calm. I sat on the couch he'd just occupied and stared at the indentation his body had left in the cushion. 4 years. That's how long it took for everything to come down to this small, physical absence. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, not because I doubted myself, but because I was trying to understand how two people could hear the same words and walk away with completely different interpretations of reality. He truly believed I'd wronged him. That realization hurt more than the video. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind flickering between memories that no longer felt safe. The first apartment we shared, the way he used to reach for my hand in crowded rooms, the version of him I thought I knew, thought I was building a future with. By morning, my phone buzzed again. Messages, voicemails, new numbers. His mother, his sister, friends who suddenly felt entitled to an opinion. I didn't respond. There was a sharpness in the silence that felt intentional. For once, I wasn't explaining. I wasn't defending. I wasn't absorbing blame for someone else's behavior just to keep the peace. I went about my day on autopilot, showered, answered emails, took meetings. Every so often, my chest would tighten out of nowhere, like my body was remembering something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Grief, maybe. Or shock. Or the delayed impact of realizing the life I'd planned no longer existed. That evening, I noticed something else. Relief. It crept in quietly, almost guiltily. I wasn't bracing for his mood. I wasn't scanning his face for signs of irritation or defensiveness. I wasn't wondering if I was being too sensitive or overreacting. The absence of that constant self-monitoring felt like taking off a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The first few nights were the hardest. I'd wake up instinctively, reaching across the bed towards someone who wasn't there. Each time, the emptiness hit like a second betrayal. Sharp, immediate, undeniable. But by the fourth night, something shifted. I slept through until morning. I started remembering things I'd brushed aside over the years, moments that hadn't seemed significant at the time, but now lined up with uncomfortable clarity. How defensive he'd get when I asked who was texting him late, how he'd dismiss my discomfort as insecurity, how easily he flirted with waiters and bartenders, calling it charm, calling me uptight if I didn't laugh along. I told myself I was being paranoid. Turns out I was being observant. A few days later, the demand letter arrived. Seeing it in writing made something in me harden, not with anger, but with resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding spiraling out of control. This was someone refusing to accept consequences and trying to regain control through intimidation. I called a friend who's a lawyer. Hearing him laugh wasn't comforting at first. It felt surreal. But when he told me there was no legal ground, that this was harassment dressed up as paperwork, my shoulders finally dropped. I wasn't in danger. I wasn't wrong. That night, after I'd changed the locks, I walked through the apartment slowly, room by room. I opened windows, rearranged furniture, threw away things that no longer felt like mine. I scrubbed the kitchen until it smelled like lemon and clean slate. For the first time since the video, I cried. Not because I missed him, because I finally let myself grieve the person I thought he was, the future I'd built around a version of him that never actually existed. By the end of the week, the anger dulled into something steadier, not forgiveness, clarity. I hadn't destroyed my life. I'd stepped out of a lie before it could harden into a marriage. And even though it hurt, even though there were moments of sadness that caught me off guard, I knew one thing with certainty. I was done explaining myself to people who benefited from me staying silent. The silence didn't last. It never does when someone refuses to accept that the conversation is over. The first message came from a number I didn't recognize. "You're really not going to talk to him?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "No." A few seconds passed. "He's not okay. He made one mistake. That's it. People deserve forgiveness." I didn't need to ask who it was. "His best man," I typed slowly. People also deserve to know who they're marrying before they marry them. The response came back almost immediately. He was drunk. It was his bachelor party. You know how those get. I exhaled. "That's not the defense you think it is." Another pause. Then, "You're being really cold. This isn't who he is." I felt something harden. Not anger. Not sadness. Recognition. "Apparently it is," I wrote. That should have ended it. Instead, another message followed. "Honestly, you were lucky he chose you. He could have done better. We all thought he was settling." I read it twice, then once more, just to be sure. "Then I did him a favor," I replied, and blocked the number. The pressure didn't stop, it just rerouted. Mutual acquaintances reached out just to check in. Friends of his framed questions like concern while quietly probing for weakness. Everyone wanted me to soften, to compromise, to absorb the discomfort so things could go back to normal. There was no normal to return to. I changed the locks 2 days later, $150, worth every cent. The landlord didn't ask questions, just nodded and got it done. That night I slept better. Not well, but better. As the days passed, more information surfaced, details I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. Someone mentioned the video had been reposted outside the club's page. Someone else said it had made its way onto Twitter. Not viral in the celebrity sense, but enough. Enough to be recognized. Enough to be whispered about. Enough for his company to notice. Pharmaceutical sales is built on trust and image. Being publicly associated with a video of a bachelor party gone wrong, him laughing while women grinded on him, money visible, phones recording, didn't align with that image. He wasn't fired, but he was moved. Inside sales, no client visits, significant pay cut. I didn't hear it from him. I heard it from someone who told me like I should feel guilty. I didn't. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't shared the video. The club did. The internet did the rest. I had sent it to one person. Everything else followed naturally. Then, one afternoon, my neighbor texted me. "He's outside your door." I felt my stomach tighten, but only for a moment. "How long?" I asked. "Over an hour, sitting on the floor, on the phone. Now he's writing something." When I got home, there was a thick envelope slid under my door. 4 pages. I didn't read it all at once. Page 1 was about love, destiny, how we were meant to be together. Page 2 reframed everything as a misunderstanding, how I'd overreacted. Page 3 listed everything he'd lost, his grandmother, his reputation, his job trajectory. Page 4 ended with a warning, carefully worded, that if I didn't take him back, he'd have nothing left, that he couldn't be responsible for what happened next. That crossed a line. I didn't call him. I called his mother. Your son left a letter that sounds like he might hurt himself, I said evenly. I'm telling you so you can check on him. This is the last contact I'll have with your family. Her response was immediate. If he does anything, that's your fault. You did this to him. I hung up, blocked the number, saved the letter, documented everything. Later, one of his friends reached out quietly, said he was fine, said this wasn't the first time he'd used that threat to regain control, said everyone was exhausted. I felt relief, then guilt for feeling relief, then relief again. By the end of that week, the pattern was clear. This wasn't grief, it was escalation. And for the first time, I understood exactly who he was when he stopped getting his way. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind of silence that presses in on your chest and makes you aware of every breath. For days after the letter, I moved through my apartment like a guest in my own life. I answered emails. I went to work. I smiled when required. But underneath it all, something had fractured. This wasn't heartbreak in the way movies portray it. There was no dramatic collapse, no screaming into pillows. It was subtler than that, more dangerous. It was the slow realization that the person I loved never existed the way I believed he did. Late at night, when the world narrowed to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic, doubt crept in. Not about what I did, but about whether I'd missed something obvious for years. I replayed moments that used to feel small, insignificant. Conversations where I'd backed down to avoid conflict. Times I'd swallowed discomfort because it was easier than being labeled dramatic. I wondered when I'd learn to minimize myself. The letter sat on my desk, face down. I hadn't thrown it away, not because I wanted to reread it, but because it felt like evidence. Proof that what I was dealing with wasn't love trying to survive, but control trying to reassert itself. Still, the weight of it settled in my bones. 4 years doesn't disappear quietly. There were memories that refused to let go, trips we'd taken, inside jokes that still surfaced unexpectedly. A future I'd pictured so clearly, it almost felt cruel to let it dissolve. That's what hurt the most. Not losing him, but losing the version of my life I'd been mentally rehearsing for years. One night, I found myself sitting on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, staring at nothing. My phone lay face up beside me, screen dark. No messages, no new threats, no apologies either. Just absence. And suddenly I felt very tired. Not sleepy, not physically exhausted. Emotionally drained in a way that made everything feel heavier than it should. I thought about how close I'd come to marrying someone who didn't see me as a partner, but as a variable, something to manage, to persuade, to pressure back into place when it stopped behaving as expected. The thought made my chest tighten. If I'd forgiven him, if I'd minimized what I saw, explained it away like everyone wanted, this would have been my future. More moments like that video, more dismissals, more blame when consequences arrived. That realization broke something open inside me. The darkest moment wasn't when the wedding was canceled. It wasn't when he showed up uninvited. It wasn't even the letter with its careful threat. It was the understanding that I had almost built my life around someone who believed accountability was optional and love meant compliance. I cried then, quietly, not for him, but for myself, for the version of me who tried so hard to be understanding, accommodating, reasonable. For the woman who thought loyalty meant enduring discomfort instead of questioning it. When the tears stopped, the room felt different. Still quiet, but less suffocating. I stood up, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red. My expression was steadier than I expected. I didn't feel strong, but I felt awake. The next morning, I took the letter and placed it in a folder with screenshots, timestamps, and notes. Not out of fear, but clarity. I wasn't being dramatic, I wasn't overreacting, I was responding to a pattern. For the first time since all of this began, I stopped asking myself, what if I'd handled it differently, and started asking, what if this was exactly the moment I needed to see the truth? The ache didn't vanish, healing isn't that kind. But the fog lifted just enough for me to see the path forward, even if I wasn't ready to walk it yet. And somewhere in that fragile space between grief and resolve, I understood something essential. This was the lowest point. And I had survived it without giving up my boundaries, my voice, or my sense of reality. The call came in the afternoon when I wasn't expecting anything anymore. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved. Another unknown voice, another attempt to pull me back into something I'd already stepped out of. But something made me pause. An instinct I'd learned to trust. It was his grandmother. Her voice was steady, composed in a way that felt deliberate, not cold, not warm, controlled. I wanted to speak to you directly, she said, without anyone else interpreting. We talked for nearly an hour. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize what had happened. She spoke the way someone does when they've already grieved privately and are now ready to state facts. She told me she was sorry for what I was going through, for what I'd been pulled into without consent. She said she'd believed she was giving her grandson a foundation, not an entitlement, that she'd hoped responsibility would come with time. I've been watching his behavior for years, she said quietly, telling myself he'd grow out of it. The video, she explained, wasn't the scandal everyone else made it out to be. It wasn't about embarrassment or appearances. It was the confirmation, she said, of who he is when he thinks no one who matters is watching. She told me about the way he'd talked about the wedding, about money, about how lucky he was that everything was being paid for, about how marriage sounded less like a commitment and more like a plan. I didn't interrupt. Then she said it, plainly, without ceremony. She had rewritten her will. He was out. She didn't tell me who replaced him. I didn't ask. That wasn't my place, and she didn't offer details as leverage. She offered them as closure. I wanted you to know, she said, that there were consequences, real ones. Not because you showed me a video, but because that video showed me the truth. When the call ended, I sat in silence, my phone resting in my palm. For the first time since everything began, I felt something click into place. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated. I hadn't destroyed anything. Later that week, one of his friends reached out. Not the best man. Someone quieter. Someone who didn't seem to be angling for forgiveness or favor. He apologized. Said he'd tried to get him to stop that night. Said it had turned into a joke, then a spectacle. Phones out. Laughter louder than discomfort. He admitted the best man encouraged it. Filmed parts of it. Egged him on. I should have called you, he said. I almost did. Why didn't you? I asked. There was a pause. He gets mean when people call him out, the friend said. I didn't want to deal with the fallout. It wasn't an excuse, but it was honest. Before hanging up, he told me one more thing. Something that stung in a way the video hadn't. Apparently, my fiancé had been bragging about how the wedding was basically free, about how once we were married, he'd be set. Good prospects, stability, support. I wasn't a partner. I was a plan. When the call ended, I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not triumph. Clarity. I hadn't orchestrated any of this. I hadn't planned revenge. I hadn't exposed anything that wasn't already public. I showed the truth once. Everything else collapsed under its own weight. That was the turning point. Not the loss of the wedding, not the money, not even the relationships that disintegrated around him. It was the moment I stopped questioning my role in the outcome. I wasn't the catalyst. I was the witness. And finally, I understood that walking away hadn't cost me anything that was ever truly mine. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet, persistent, impossible to stop once they started moving. I heard about his job before I heard from him again. Not directly, never directly anymore. Someone from his circle mentioned it casually, like it was something I should feel responsible for. The video had made its way further than anyone expected. Reposts, screenshots, comments. Not viral in a celebrity sense, but visible enough. Someone at his company recognized him. Someone else forwarded it. Management noticed. Pharmaceutical sales runs on image and trust. You don't get to be the face of a product when your face is already associated with something else. He wasn't fired, but he was moved. Inside sales. No client-facing role. No more travel. No more relationship-building dinners or conferences. And with that shift came a significant pay cut. I didn't celebrate. I didn't comment. I didn't do anything at all. Still, the blame found its way back to me. He told people I'd leaked the video, that I'd ruined his career, that I'd gone out of my way to make sure everyone saw it. None of that was true. I hadn't posted a single thing. I hadn't forwarded it beyond one private message. The club had posted it publicly. The internet did what the internet does. But facts didn't matter anymore. Not to him. Not to the people who needed a villain to make sense of consequences. Messages started coming again. From new numbers this time. His friends. Still male. Still defensive. Still convinced that if I'd just stayed quiet, everything would have been fine. I didn't respond. A few days later, my neighbor texted me while I was at work. He's back. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, but it didn't spiral this time. Where? I asked. Outside your door, sitting on the floor. He's been there a while. I pictured it without needing to see it. The hallway. The closed door. The boundary he couldn't cross anymore. How long? Almost 2 hours. He's on the phone. Arguing. Now he's writing something. I didn't rush home. I finished my workday. I took my time. When I finally unlocked my door, the hallway was empty. But something waited for me. A thick envelope slid underneath the door. 4 pages. I didn't read it all in one sitting. I didn't need to. The first page talked about love, destiny, how we were meant to be together, how no one else would ever understand him the way I did. The second page reframed everything. The video was a misunderstanding. I'd overreacted. Anyone else would have laughed it off. I was too rigid, too sensitive. The third page shifted tone again. Everyone had abandoned him. His grandmother, his family, his career trajectory. Nothing was fair. Nothing was his fault. The fourth page made my skin crawl. If I didn't take him back, he wrote, he'd have nothing left. And if that happened, he couldn't be responsible for what came next. I folded the letter carefully and set it down. This wasn't heartbreak speaking. This was pressure. I didn't call him. I called his mother. Your son left a letter that suggests he might hurt himself, I said calmly. I'm telling you so you can check on him. This will be my last contact with your family. She didn't hesitate. If he does anything, she said sharply, that's your fault. You did this to him. I hung up. Blocked the number. I saved the letter, took photos, wrote down the date and time of the call. Not because I wanted to escalate, but because I understood, finally, what I was dealing with. Later that night, someone else reached out. A mutual acquaintance. A friend of his, not close enough to be loyal, not distant enough to stay silent. He told me my ex was fine, angry, complaining, playing the victim, but fine. He also said, quietly, that this wasn't the first time he'd used threats like that to regain control. That people were exhausted, that the pattern was familiar. I felt relief, then guilt for feeling relief, then relief again. By the end of that week, the picture was complete. This wasn't a man in crisis. This was a man losing leverage, and no amount of explaining, placating, or silence would have changed that. By the time everything finally went quiet, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for closure, not for him to suddenly understand what he'd done. The chaos had burned itself out, leaving behind a strange, unfamiliar calm. I sold the engagement ring a few days later. 60% of what I paid for it, less than I hoped, but enough to cover the deposits I'd personally lost. It felt symbolic closing that loop. Not a victory, just an ending. The apartment became mine again. I cleaned it top to bottom, moved the furniture, let fresh air in through open windows. I wasn't erasing memories so much as reclaiming space, turning our into mine. I started seeing a therapist the following week. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet decision to process instead of suppress. She said something during our first session that stuck with me. You didn't plan revenge, she said. You reacted to truth. She was right. I hadn't schemed. I hadn't plotted. I hadn't tried to ruin anyone. I showed one person the truth, and everything else unfolded naturally. That isn't vindictive. That's reality doing what it does when lies stop being protected. A few days later, a card arrived in the mail, handwritten, from his grandmother. She thanked me for my integrity, for my honesty, for having the courage to do what most people avoid. She said she'd pray for me. Coming from her, that meant something. Do I feel sad sometimes? Yes. 4 years doesn't disappear without leaving a bruise. There were good moments, real ones. I loved who I thought he was. But I don't regret what I did, because in all the calls, messages, letters, and accusations, he never once said, I'm sorry. He blamed me, blamed the club, blamed his friends, blamed the internet. That told me everything I needed to know. I'm not dating. I'm not rushing to replace what I lost. I'm learning who I am without constantly adjusting myself to fit someone else's comfort. 3 weeks ago, I was planning a wedding. Now I'm planning a life that doesn't require me to look away from red flags and call it love. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's simple. When someone shows you who they are, especially when they think no one important is watching, believe them. Truth doesn't destroy healthy relationships. It only destroys the ones built on pretending. To everyone who listened, who reached out with support, or shared similar stories, thank you. If you've been in a situation like this, or if you have advice for someone who is, feel free to comment below. Share this story if it helps someone else feel less alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this about boundaries, consequences, and choosing yourself, don't forget to subscribe. I'm moving forward now. And for the first time in a long time, that feels right.